For decades, the US dollar has been more than currency. It became the center of global power. Oil was traded in dollars. International business moved through dollars. Entire economies stored dollars as protection. And when Washington wanted leverage, the dollar became a weapon. But something changed. After years of sanctions, trade wars, rising debt, and geopolitical tension, countries that once depended on the dollar started looking for alternatives. Quietly, carefully. And if that trend continues, the global economy could enter one of the biggest financial shifts in modern history. For most Americans, the dollar feels permanent, stable, untouchable, almost natural. But reserve currencies do not stay dominant forever. History has seen this before. The British pound once controlled global trade. For much of the 19th century, Britain sat at the center of global commerce. Its empire stretched across continents. Its navy protected shipping routes. Its banks financed international trade. If goods moved between Asia, Europe, Africa, or the Americas, British finance was often somewhere in the transaction. London became the financial capital of the world. The pound looked untouchable, permanent, almost natural. Then came two world wars. Britain emerged victorious, but financially exhausted. Debt surged. Economic power gradually shifted across the Atlantic. In 1944, representatives from dozens of countries gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal was to design a new financial order for the post-war world. The result helped place the US dollar at the center of global finance, a transition that would shape the next generation of economic power. Before that, other empires controlled the financial system of their time. Power shifts slowly at first, then suddenly. And today, many governments are asking an uncomfortable question. What happens if relying too heavily on the US dollar becomes a risk? That question became much louder after sanctions against Russia, because for many countries, it was not just Russia watching, it was the entire world. In 1971, President Richard Nixon ended the dollar's direct connection to gold. At the time, it looked temporary. Instead, it changed the global financial system permanently. The dollar survived because the world still trusted American economic power and because oil trade continued flowing through dollars. That system became known as the petrodollar era. For decades, it gave Washington enormous influence over global finance. But systems built on trust become vulnerable when trust starts cracking. China noticed this vulnerability years ago. So did Russia. So did countries that feared becoming financially exposed to US pressure. To understand why, you first need to understand something called SWIFT. SWIFT is not a bank. It does not store money. It does not lend money. Instead, it functions as the communication network, connecting thousands of financial institutions around the world. Think of it as the messaging system that helps international payments move smoothly between banks. When companies buy goods overseas, when governments pay for imports, when energy transactions cross borders, systems connected to SWIFT often play a critical role. Then, sanctions against Russia intensified.
The US has announced new sanctions against Russia.
Sanctions on Russia's.
Several major Russian banks lost access to SWIFT. The message was impossible to ignore. Access to the global financial system could become a geopolitical tool. For America's allies, this demonstrated the strength of the existing system. For America's competitors, it highlighted a potential vulnerability. Because if access can be restricted, dependence suddenly looks very different. And that realization pushed many countries to begin exploring alternatives. Now, trade deals increasingly bypass the dollar entirely. China and Brazil agreed to settle parts of their trade using local currencies. Russia shifted energy transactions away from dollars after sanctions intensified. Even longtime American partners have started exploring alternatives. Not because the dollar is collapsing tomorrow, but because dependence creates vulnerability. That distinction matters. This is not a dramatic, overnight collapse story. It is something potentially more important. A slow, structural shift. And slow shifts are dangerous because most people ignore them until the consequences become visible. The United States represents roughly a quarter of global GDP. Yet the dollar dominates far more of the global financial system than that alone would suggest. That imbalance gave America extraordinary advantages: cheaper borrowing, stronger sanctions power, global demand for U.S. debt, and massive geopolitical leverage. Now, imagine even a partial reduction in that dominance. The implications become enormous. Ironically, America's greatest financial weapon may have accelerated the search for alternatives. Sanctions demonstrated the power of the dollar system, but they also revealed the risks of being trapped inside it. For countries already competing with Washington, that became a warning. And once enough nations start building alternative systems, momentum can begin feeding itself. New payment systems, new trade agreements, new reserve strategies, new financial alliances. This is why BRICS discussions suddenly attract so much global attention. Building an alternative sounds simple. In reality, it is extraordinarily difficult. The dollar dominates partly because everyone trusts that everyone else accepts it. Replacing that convenience is a challenge few countries have solved. Consider BRICS. China may prefer using the yuan. India may favor the rupee. Brazil may want settlements in its own currency.
The challenge is not making a trade deal. The challenge is deciding which currency everyone wants to hold afterward. Would India want large reserves of yuan? Would China want significant exposure to rupees? Would every member trust the same system equally? These questions reveal a deeper reality. Moving away from one dominant currency does not automatically create stability. It can also create friction. And friction creates uncertainty. That is why the future may not belong to one replacement currency. It may belong to a world where several financial systems compete simultaneously. A world that is more flexible, but potentially more fragmented. Not because BRICS can instantly replace the dollar. They cannot. At least not yet. The real story is something more subtle. The world may be moving toward fragmentation instead of one dominant financial center. And fragmentation changes everything. What happens when the world no longer depends on a single financial system? Energy markets change, trade routes change, political alliances change. Even inflation pressure inside the United States could eventually feel different. That POSIX explains why global central banks have been increasing gold purchases at unusually high levels in recent years. Countries prepare for uncertainty long before ordinary people notice it. The dollar still remains overwhelmingly dominant. Most global trade still flows through it. Most reserves still depend on it. And no true replacement currently exists. But dominance is not the same thing as invincibility. What makes this moment important is not collapse. It is transition. The world is slowly testing what comes after total dollar dependence. And history shows that major financial shifts rarely feel dramatic in the beginning. They feel gradual, technical, easy to dismiss, until suddenly they reshape the balance of global power. The uncomfortable question is no longer, will the dollar disappear? The real question is, what happens if the world simply needs it less? If countries continue building alternatives to the dollar system, does that create a more balanced global economy or a far more unstable one?